We seek alternative formats and methodologies for narrating hypocenters through the arts, actions, research, and storytelling. When all hypocenters are connected to no one owns the hypocenters. 3 all hypocenters.
It's just a little bit of chill.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of get too intense.
Yeah.
That's the idea I was told.
Okay.
No, no, no. I mean, yeah, the reality is intense. What can you do? You know, the idea of like in Japan, like midnight radio is always just kind of like people
Yeah,
like
like
semi like like hey, it's
trying
Fiction
to wind
Jazz.
down and not
Yeah.
get wound up,
I
right?
mean, here in LA, there's a couple cool like midnight jazz station. You know, they just played some cool stuff and DJ.
I feel like this is like the hardest task is to how to mellow mellow out with a discussion on, nuclear issues.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we're in Southern California, and that's the sun helps with the mellowing out.
Yeah. I think it makes things slow and still, and it kind of reminds you of your body. That I think in DC and New York, it's so kinetic and like all over the place, and I love that energy too. But
Sure, sure.
I think the calm, especially because we're facing so many crises, it's nice for nature to remind us that we have bodies and at the end of the day we're
Yes,
gonna be
yes.
okay.
And you think it happens here more than the other there?
Yeah.
Because there it's cold.
It's
Then you're
cold.
just
I
protecting.
think just the people I'm around,
Yeah.
they're in the system.
Yeah, yeah.
They're sort of in this whirlpool of power and
Yeah.
certainty. And then here I feel grounded. I have my family.
Uh-huh.
I have friends who are outside of the policy space, still doing amazing art.
Sure,
It's
sure,
still
sure,
political,
sure.
but it's not the same
Uh-huh.
register, I think, as like the policy talk in the East Coast. So
Yes, I can kind of only imagine.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't see people with the yoga mats and walking around with the.
Oh, I do, and I make fun of them.
In DC.
Oh, in DC? Oh, in here, yeah. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't know if I belong
Yeah,
here because
yeah.
that is not my scene. And in DC too, there's certainly, but it's here I feel like it's saturated with the yoga, the screen, like the yoga teacher, the screenwriter, just it's a different world, I feel.
Okay, Takashi-san, I think we are to start. I can't hear him. He was gonna send us a message, no? Or is it already starting? Let's check.
Oh, there it is.
How often you go there?
Oh my gosh, once a month now.
Oh, wow.
Which is what, and I'm trying to not, maybe
That
once every
flight's
2
not
months.
easy. This flight is never easy.
Yeah.
Because you go in the morning, you waste the whole day.
Mhm.
You leave in the evening. Well, you can only leave so far in the
Yes,
evening.
it's tough.
And when you leave the red eye, it's horrible. It's not.
Yeah, I'm still getting used to it. The next well, I was able to push it back. The next time I need to be there is like end of April. So I
Mhm.
have, and I got back what, like a week and a half ago. So
Okay.
there's some space.
And when you're there, you are staying in a hotel. You have like a little place to crash, and you're
Still
just
trying
going
to figure that out. Like I can't do hotels because I want to be able to eat real
Mhm.
food. Like I don't like the idea of eating out.
Sure, sure.
But because in New York they've banned or made it harder to
Do
rent
they?
out Airbnbs, it's hard to find like a kitchen, like a place with a kitchen. So it's a um
Must
I'm
not
still
be easy.
trying to
And
figure
every
it
time
out.
you're there, what, 2 or 3 days, or
No,
three?
like the
Oh.
last time I was there, I was like there for 9 days.
Mm.
Well, that's not true. Well, I was in DC for like 4 days, and I was there, and then I was in New York for a week. So, um, minimum like a week to get all the work done, which is still a lot
That's all.
to not be able to feel at home. And I think the food. I mean, New York has amazing food, but to eat restaurant food every
Yeah, and it
day,
gets
I feel
expensive.
it, and it gets expensive, and I'm like, I don't know. So that's been a little tough. So I'm still trying to figure that out.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's not easy. This by by coast
Yeah.
by coast over.
There might be an opportunity. I mean, I haven't decided yet, but I might end up in Austria for 3 months. This in Vienna because there's a UN headquarters there. Um, but that's going to be a larger family conversation because if I go for 3 months, that means, my husband and my son would probably go with me, and
Mhm.
which is not necessarily a
When in
bad
summer?
thing. Probably August through October is, which is nice, yes. I mean,
Good.
like,
We spend a lot. I spend a lot of time. I was just there December.
okay.
We have a lot of friends there.
Um, yeah, so I don't know. Um, I'm looking forward to it, but there's so many uncertainties in the world, though. It's just like, I don't know. I can't even imagine what August is gonna be like if our trajectory is that every week something implodes,
Yeah.
and so it's a little
Like, are they
hard.
cutting on budgets?
Yes. So, and this is not like secret or anything. So, the UN is operating under like 20% of its approved budget, and so
20% off or
yeah,
20% off?
off.
Off, 80%.
Yes.
Okay.
And so, I mean, I can't speak for their, other offices, but I've heard some have been like slashed, disappeared completely. For us, a majority of our team is actually being relocated to Vienna, to cut costs because New York is so expensive. And yeah, so there's that on top of just what's happening in the world and how it's shifting norms and undermining international law.
Mhm.
So it's almost like there's the global, there's the personal, and it's a lot. Unfortunately, not the most mellow thing you could talk about on a midnight
Of course,
conversation.
of course. But we are, I think, starting at the midnight.
Okay.
And it's a good leeway to introduce you as a distinguished guest for our first ever Hypocenter Midnight Radio series.
Yes.
Let's see how this is gonna go.
Yes.
We came up with this idea with a few colleagues of ours, and then I also thought about the atomic bulletin of atomic scientists. In their call that they made in January 6th of this year was 85 seconds to the midnight. So I was just thinking about how that also is. We are at the dawn of, we are at the very close to the hypocenter in any metaphysical real way. We just did our whole tour going through. That's how we met you. At going to Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and to Tokyo, and so we have an interesting, amazing chance to meet here in Santa Monica in 18th Street Art Center. And you're gracious to come here and do a little share time with us. Can you talk to us a little about you? Like you are doing a lot of different
Yeah,
things.
I
I'm always
am.
intrigued with everything you're
My
doing.
goodness, thank you so much.
And then I really want to know very much what you do.
Sure, sure. Good evening, everybody. My name is Lovely Umayam. I'm a nuclear policy researcher. That's how I started. I started very early in my career. I was just talking to a bunch of undergrads here in Southern California about like how I ended up doing what I do, and I just realized it struck me, oh my goodness, I got started super young in this field exploring the impacts of nuclear weapons. I was 23.
Okay.
And the way that I started is very unique in that I ended up in the government first.
Okay.
I was very fortunate enough to get an opportunity to work for the National Nuclear Security Administration in the United States. And my um, area of expertise there was nuclear non-proliferation. So I worked with different, policy experts, scientists in different countries on how to protect and secure nuclear material. And while I don't necessarily have like a engineering or physics background, I'm like purely policy. Like I learned by doing, like what it means to go to facilities and inspect nuclear material, what nuclear material looks like. So I started with a very like specific policy expertise. But then I also come from a family of artists and makers and activists. I grew up born in the Philippines, but moved in Los Angeles and was immediately steeped in sort of the community building in Los Angeles around, uplifting Filipino immigrants. And so I was just surrounded by critical thinkers that are always pushing against the system, questioning the system, and always prioritizing what it means um, to help real people first, as opposed to, again, upholding the system. So while I was pursuing the work in the US government and all of my colleagues, it was fantastic work. I learned so much about nuclear history and nuclear policy. There was a part of me that wasn't being, I guess, fed, if you will, like this idea of, wow, like you're working with some, like, in high places, traveling to so many places and meeting different people, but are you actually like helping the people? I don't know if that makes sense. And it was just in my brain. And normally, or how I was taught, like growing up in LA, is that in order to reach out to people and help people, you have to meet them where they're at. And I learned very early on is the arts, engaging in the arts is a way to gather and reflect and talk. And so that's when I started thinking about, okay, what does it mean to bring in art making? And it wasn't like a big leap because I'm already quite well aware of how the nuclear is very visual, right? And that's how people tend to uh, encounter it, whether it's a picture of a mushroom cloud, a picture of a power plant, a picture of a monster like Godzilla, And so it was natural for me to bring that in, but it didn't quite, obviously, it didn't quite make sense in my work in government. And so after like a few happy years, I mean, it was very enlightening to be in that space and learn nuclear policy in that space. I decided to leave the government and ended up in a few research organizations in DC. But again, like it didn't, my interest in the arts and community engagement didn't quite fit the template that you see in DC. So I kept just backing out and still making friends and expanding my connections and my expertise, but I just didn't fit that mold. And then now I'm basically doing my own thing. through the Bombshelltoe Policy and Arts Collective. It's an entity that allows me to collaborate with artists and activists and scientists, basically pulling from all the different worlds I've been able to learn from and be in. And at the same time, I'm still like working with different organizations and institutions that are plugged into the policy space. So I think I'm in this part of my life where I'm able to, it's a struggle, it's a juggle, but I'm able to have it both ways where I'm learning about nuclear policy and still keeping up with the current events and still feel like I belong in the peace and security field here in the United States, but at the same time, not felt like I'm trapped in it. I'm still working with artists and still working with people. So I'm sorry, I know that's like a really long way of explaining who I am, but it is very different from what one would consider as like your traditional nuclear expert who lives in the United States.
Yes, yes, you have the art side, and I think you have the uh, um, these other community engagement sides. That is, I think, is very intriguing. So let's cut to the chase.
Okay. Gosh.
I had this. Let's talk about this. I mean, I have not kept up so much with this. I remember last time I was there, I did a presentation at the first committee. I remember seeing Ecuadorian. I mean, back it was 2011 or 12, and I saw how they don't send the highest people there. They have like a second in charge or in charge of disarmament. And then I remember this Ecuadorian intern. She had this like high heel, and she was passing out the papers to this other it's not so big countries.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, this is how it was intriguing to see. But this is how the coalitions are made, and they're making this. And it's actually surprisingly accessible back then. I don't know now, but it was an interesting place. You can actually engage as an ordinary citizen into these places, and now NGOs have a kind of a rather big place. I mean, I was very impressed actually. So that was my experience 13, 14 years ago. And now I just kind of, last few days ago, I had this relevance, just an enlightenment that like I forgave a lot of things because like you can't do anything, and then when I'm involved I think many of the collective members, Hypocenter, that's the collective, myself also, we're involved in this case for 20 some years, and I've been working with this atomic bomb survivors, this archive project, movie project, book project, never ends. It's never ending. And there's always a feeling that like anger there.
No, totally.
Of course, and like America should apologize, and it's not as simple as that. We all know this. And of course, the survivors said, so if you have to forgive, it's all because of the war. That also we know this. But then, the last few days, I just kind of felt this like, oh my God, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing. And then also to understand in 1945, in August 5th or 4th, I mean, it was probably as sunny as like this.
Yeah.
And people had families, and then there was conscious people, I think. And but they had no choice.
Yes.
So it's a very difficult awakening that these things are. It really is an 85 seconds to the midnight, or even closer, because that was January, and that we also are. A lot of us are bystanders.
Yes.
So that's my kind of a change,
Yeah,
moment. How I feel now.
When you mentioned that the theme here is midnight, it's so funny. I couldn't help but think about like, what do I do at midnight? Like, I don't go sleeping, soundly. Like, oftentimes I'm, that's when the anxieties come,
Yes.
catches up with me. And unfortunately, that's also the time when I am on my phone and I'm like doom scrolling and catching up with the world, right? And yeah, I mean, yes, I think you have every right to be angry and overwhelmed. And that is unfortunately our reality. So from the nuclear policy side of things, there's a few things that concern me. One of them being just the degradation of diplomacy. To me, international institutions, like exactly norms, the norm of talking to each other. And to me, and again, like I started off in a very interesting time in the nuclear policy field where it was like the Obama era. He went to Hiroshima, right? And that was like the beginning of the New START treaty with Russia. It had this like hopeful diplomacy is norm building, and then now in 2026 we're at a point where not only do we not have any more arms control agreements with any nuclear weapon states, but what the Trump administration has really prioritized is this showing of force as foreign policy, you know. And I was just listening to a podcast with a former national security official in the first Trump administration, and she was trying to justify this idea like we had to bomb Iran in order to move forward with the diplomacy with them. And to me, it's like you can't bomb the person that you're trying to talk to. Like it, to me, it just didn't quite make sense. But that is what we're doing.
I also saw some similar chief of staff of Colin Powell talking about kind of thing he had. They this, you know, they try to persuade the whole UN with this like you know, how there's a nuclear weapon in Iraq and so on. He's just talking about it. You know, we were not as bad as that.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, well, this has been going on for a long time.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's okay to just feel everything that we're feeling, given that the world is changing, and it's changing in a way that feels overwhelming. It feels like changing in a way that's spiraling out of control. But, and hopefully this is where the calm can come in this conversation.
Yes.
You know, and maybe I'm being incredibly optimistic here, and perhaps that's my role, right? Is to remind us that this is a time when we fight, and that we resist and ask critical questions. My work with Bombshelltoe, you know, the collective, is infusing the world with stories that remind people that the impact of the nuclear, may that be nuclear weapons or nuclear technology, at the end of the day, that is embodied, right? And these stories happen to someone and someplace. And it's something that you can actually access, that is tangible, that is a person, that is a place. You can help that. I think a lot of our conversations around foreign policy so high up. And I want to mention even the stories we tell about it, or the aesthetics of foreign policy and the nuclear art, feel very detached. I was again talking to some undergrads last week about this, that their understanding of nuclear issues right now is primarily satellite imagery of either like Iranian facilities being bombed, or, you know, there is, but they don't actually know what yellow cake may look like, or, you know, it's so interesting that this detachment because of the visual representation that we see. And so through art, I think, you know, what does it mean to remind people that, and the one project that comes to mind as we're talking right now is Ways of Knowing, which is a film about uranium mining in Navajo Nation. Like that project.
Produced this film.
Yes. Directed by Caleb Briett, executive produced by Sunny Dooley, who is a Navajo storyteller and elder. Produced by Frizzly Soberanis and Adriel Lewis. And that, to me, that was like such a humbling lesson for me, because again, given where I started in my career, I was thinking of things so high up that I have to admit, I never, at that point, even though I was in the government for like 3 years, I've never actually spoken to or encountered like a survivor. And it was those projects like Ways of Knowing that allowed me to meet Sunny and Tina and, you know, Janine, and to them, it's very much material, right? And, you know, again, there's trauma and sadness and you know, it's a complicated story, but the fact that I can know who they are and see this place, like to me, that you can actually do something with that. And I wish that um, we had more space to think of foreign policy as, you know, these opportunities to actually like reach out and get to know other people and other places, because that can be activating. It doesn't have to be so like paralyzing. And you know, I think that that's where we are with 85 seconds to midnight, is that we're looking at it so high up. And there's nothing wrong with looking, I mean, that is our reality. We have to confront the fact that there's so many things happening and it feels destabilizing. But what does it mean to introduce, you know, like I was mentioning earlier, a sense of quiet and a sense of calmness, because at the end of the day, it's me and you talking and we're thinking this through, you know? So that's what art, working on it from like an artistic sense, gives me. And I'm not sure if that's like the same for you or others at the collective.
I mean, this is the big theme of the all of our collective. I think any artist touching the issues that has a lot of, I mean, death,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually an ongoing topic that we can, like as I said, we are bystanders,
Mm-hmm.
and yet, and we're just art. Art is, you know, papers and, you know, photographs and, you know, experiences are. It's so fragile.
Yes.
I mean, you know, you can't do much.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So yeah, it's a very difficult reckoning for the artist. You know, believing that we could do something about it, and of course we are continuing to do that. But yeah? So this is a kind of you know, particularly for us, like because we can see the reality here, we can see the reality there.
No,
We
totally.
have gone to the Hypocenter ground zero. We stepped on the place where there's still 3,000-4,000 people more dead underneath.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you know, we want to try to talk about, you know, what it looks like when you're standing there.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an
Totally.
important point for me and for us to actually go to these places with our own feet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's there. There's no denying
Mm-hmm.
that something horrific, you know, happened underneath this particular earth. Right? So that's we're just trying to just keep going. I guess that's the part of it.
But you know, I really like what you said, because I mean, it's true for me. When I visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki, specifically in Nagasaki, there was this the big statue of the
Sure.
woman and child, and
Sure.
I just literally had to sit there and let the wind, you know, like it's just it's such an experience.
Mhm.
But I think tapping into like my creative and artistic side, sometimes I what I actually need is to allow the grief to wash over me. Because I think with foreign policy, you're not, like, you're kind of trained not to feel, if that
Mhm.
makes sense, in
Sure.
order to just keep, you know, the agenda or the
Sure.
policy position. But the reality is, these military orders or policies are going to affect someone, and oftentimes they shatter people's lives. And I think what the art allows me to do is literally, and it seems so simple, is to feel. And to me, feeling is the first step to doing something. Um, and you know, again, I don't think that art, because I do have this back and forth. It's like, is what I'm doing, does it matter? You know, especially in this age of polycrisis, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
I think the
I mean, I think it's a healthy one.
Yes.
I mean, it is true. I mean, it's such a huge topic,
yeah,
and then you know we're just trying to do a mini little change.
yes,
And yet I'm always trying not to forget this critical discourse. But then yet at the same time, I mean, yes, we have to start somewhere.
yes,
And you know, I mean, this making thread, the making connections, I think is continuing to keep the work going.
yes, yes.
What do you think of? Sorry, I may have cut you off.
No, no, no.
What do
Please,
you
please.
think of how all this thing is unleashing itself? Strangely enough, with the time that many of the survivors of Auschwitz,
Oh, that's
survivors that's seen atomic bomb, obviously, are departing.
Yes.
And they're, you know, and I remember this first time that one of the person that I interviewed up in San Francisco, he said, "I can finally forget." And in Japan, when you write "forget," it's a heart you write the word hard, and then you write passive. So finally he can forget. He can sleep.
Wow.
Well, finally he's starting to forget because it was these images, of course, you
Yes.
heard, are so intense and so out of this world that
Uh-huh.
it has ingrained in many people's mind.
Mhm.
And with that, I feel a torn sense of, I mean, this the irony of life, you know?
Totally. It's actually, thank you for asking that question. There's so much there. I feel like I
Yes.
can
Yeah.
talk about
But
it.
it's no coincidence. It's no
Yes,
coincidence.
there's
I mean,
no
this,
coincidence for sure. And it's like, okay, let me think where to start. I think it's scary, right? Because, you know, entering this era of forgetting, right? There's entering the era of forgetting, but also it's happening at the same time when we're also entering this era of not knowing what truth is.
yes,
And
yeah,
and so to me, there's also just the information architecture is changing where and I guess I've just read so many articles as of late talking about how um the Trump administration is memifying
yes,
the
yes, yes.
the Iran war,
So that we ran now.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of AI generated
Yes.
videos and you don't know the
Shameless.
truth. Yes, exactly. And that dehumanizes, right? Like the artificiality of that
Yes,
of
yes,
that
yes.
is dehumanizing war. As we're beginning to lose real people, that to me is very scary. That like I don't know, um that feels uh like a big challenge that I'm not sure how we're going to escape that. Oh, sorry, are we going to
No,
say
no, but I
that?
think you touched on a very interesting intersection of
Yes.
this, like forgetting us as a collective consciousness. Myself as well. I didn't think the first time I heard these stories, I would never forget it.
Yes.
And now, 20 years later, I've heard another 50, 60 more people's stories.
Yes.
I've forgotten some things.
Yes.
We forget.
Yes.
We can only keep so much, you know.
We can only keep so much, and then our technological tools are literally making us forget even more. Faster.
Yes.
And
But that
yeah.
thought and collective, consciousness, and we're forgetting collectively because we're losing these.
Yes. Exactly. Yes.
And then how this kind of this like huge like this truth covering, this media is just you have
Yes.
no idea what is real, what's not real. How does that? I think there's something there.
There's something there, but I think this is the reason why like I'm so excited that your collective exists is because now we are entering um the era of forgetting, but also now it's much more important that our secondary source, if our primary sources are passing away, that the secondary sources are respectful and authentic. And I feel like the artistic interpretation and like the that the hypercenter like that is the next best thing, aside from like really good interviews of survivors, and like that has now it to me that's like gold now because that's all we have of their memories. And to me that then it, while I'm afraid because of this collision, right, that we've been talking about, it also makes me feel motivated to do this work and to get to know artists like you, because I think this is the time that we can really step up and present survivor stories and their memories in a beautiful, authentic way. Um, and the other thing that I wanted to mention, it took me, I've been doing this for more than a decade, and but it took me so long to actually meet an atomic bomb survivor, and I am ashamed to say that. Um, but when and I've read stories, of course, they're online, and when you're doing nuclear policy work, it can't. There are resources, but there's something about actually being face to face with a survivor and talking to them. And I think that experience also taught me the power of story. Like these stories are not static. They're like a
Sure.
relationship,
Sure.
And for me, as someone who again started off in the US government, a nuclear weapon state, I had built in assumptions about what I thought that engagement
Okay,
was. And
okay.
as I was talking to them and realizing, oh my gosh, he looks like my grandfather. Oh my gosh, And and I think that there's something about the exchange and of with a survivor that we're also going to lose.
Oh, yes.
Um
Yes.
uh
And you will be the last person to have, you will be the last generation to have
yes,
heard these stories directly.
yes. And so now the question is, what is the role of art to be the next best thing, the next best like secondary source? Um, and how do we do that respectfully? Because one could argue, well, you could just like put it up on TikTok, and I'm like, no. I mean, maybe you'll get more eyeballs, but I think what with your bus tour and what that the collective has done, it's not spectacle. There's something that happens when you're really engaged in the arts that isn't. Does that make sense? Like, yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things we're trying to just make it go against the force to make everything simpler and shorter, and we're trying to keep making sure that people are aware and we are aware that it's complex.
Yes.
And things are a lot more complex, but at the end it's also human story.
Yes.
These people are not so different than
Yes.
us, and it was again, you realize it was not so different outside. It was, they have fathers and mothers, and this is a very, and it just happens like that. So, I mean, that's, I think I seen how the survivor story is getting much more emotional because first, yeah, I was interviewing people that was 19, 18. They're a lot more rational.
Mhm.
And then to the last 5 years, you have people they were 4 years old, they're 3 years old. For them, it's like very abstract,
Yeah.
memory, and then it's a feeling, right? And then now, you really have. I mean, there's very few people that can speak now. So the first hand that itself is getting more and more abstract, I think, and I think we are it's dangerous to be abstract.
Of course,
And
yes.
then this is also a big, of course, I'm sure you've thought a lot about this. How it's such an abstract notion. This like 70,000 people dead. I mean, I can't even imagine to try to imagine that. And yet, it's such a very concrete notion. And this gap, I mean, I'm not afraid to say this gap continue to intrigue me, and it's actually pushed me to like really want to understand how do we, how do we get here, and how there's the same forces that are happening with AI, and this how do we, so it's an interesting gap that I'm always trying to kind of understand and do something about it.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I think one other thing that I think about that all may complicate this even more is
Yes,
that the side of pro-nuclear, I mean, the binary I think is problematic, but like those who want to uh value nuclear weapons,
Sure.
right? And believe in its deterrent capability. And then even on the nuclear technology side, basically scale nuclear technology and pair it with AI.
Sure.
What's
Which
what,
has, let me just add that, which has roots in this international order that
yes,
is
of course.
collapsing right now.
Yes.
But okay, let's keep
Yeah.
that on there.
But they're really good at storytelling and
Yes.
image making, And so that's another kind of like, I don't know what to call it, like pressure point. When we're talking about that collision of forgetting and like the technology of, I don't know what to call it, just um uh post-truth, right? And then you have, the other side of the nuclear that they're telling stories that say, well, it's inevitable, the inevitability of this technology. May that be like, well, it's a dog eat dog world, so we're the only ones who can have nuclear weapons. Or it could be like, well, AI is our new normal, so we need data centers. And henceforth we need, power for that. Hence we need more nuclear power. Like, they're really good at telling the story, and
Sure.
I'm always thinking about, like, what is the counter to that? Like, what is the critique? May that be like what is the counter image? What is the counter story? And it's not so much as, again, a pro and anti. It's like, what kinds of stories and images can we present in order to think critically and ask questions and slow down? Because I think what's happening is people are being swept up by all this news. Um, and what typically happens is that we're so overwhelmed that we just let it happen, and then we look back and realize, oh my goodness, we could have done something about it. But I think the problem is, when you're living in that reality, it's just, you're being inundated by stories and images that this is the wave of the future. So they're like, and it's inevitable. And so to me, art also has this capacity to just like cut through that and even like slow it down, in order for us to, like, again, ground ourselves and ask questions. So I don't know if I don't know if any of that resonates with you or you've thought about it, but the pro nuclear, there's something going on there, the way that they've been able to effectively pair it with like futurist talk, AI.
Of course.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me. Like, I don't know.
It's a very well executed storytelling campaign. I mean, 1995, they were stopping the Enola Gay's exhibition. Part of it being the atomic bomb survival stories in Smithsonian. This is quite early on, and you understand, like, there was a force because people understood the story. How the storytelling component, how important that is. And I kept thinking, when I left the Oppenheimer movie, like, if they spend about 50 million in production, 50 million in advertisement, right? It's you spend as much amount in advertisement as making these films. So it's like, what if they could have made a film about the survivors, that person with their family, with the best actors, best directors. I mean, they would never do that because it's the machine, and it's very hard to combat this huge, it's bombarding you. And we are like,
Sorry,
again, we're going back to the but how do we
I will say though, disarmament, like, it has an amazing story. I was just checking, at the peak of the Cold War, we had like 70,000 nuclear weapons. We're now down to 12,000. It's still a lot.
Yes.
Right? But that is a story in and of itself.
Sure.
Of like, how did we get from a place of 70,000 to a significantly lower number, right? Like, it's not, I think when people think of disarmament or non-proliferation, it's like, lost cause, but I think if you actually take a step back and appreciate the timeline of disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control, like, it works. And I think part of the problem though is that we don't have an appreciation for how these are intergenerational. We don't do it so that we see the change now. We do it so that we pass it on, because it's the technology and the politics is too complicated for it to have instant gratification of, like, total, like, global zero now. It's just not going to happen. Like, we still live in a reality where we're so, like, the stories are so deeply entrenched and effective and powerful that it's hard to get rid of them. And so, but that doesn't mean that we haven't achieved something. And sometimes I contemplate, like, how do we tell an effective, beautiful, motivating story about disarmament, given that you don't see immediate change? I don't know. Like, and that's one of the things that, Bombshelltoe, like in terms of like that complicated like artist headspace that's always wanting to make things complicated, and
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah,
where
yeah.
I live. Is like, how do you do this? You know?
Yes.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think you're thinking very long term
Yes.
about this. Yeah, because we're of course world around us wants us to have instant answers and
Yes.
solution. There's some kind of desire, the self oppressed idea, self oppressed homework I have to myself. Like I have to find solutions,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and then like we have to change the world and we have to resist. And these kind of words have really, become so flat because
Yes.
you know. So thinking in long terms I
Yeah.
think, is a very important thing.
Yeah. But it is hard because again, we have social media, like all of the technological tools that we depend on use are training us not to think that way. So it's a
And
fight.
I think I'm going to jump even further and say we're becoming like a data point. I was speaking with young people, and then they're all kind of giving up on this, our data being just used for everything, and that we're just going around everywhere, like collecting data for some other companies. But if we don't participate in that, you're nobody here.
Yes.
And then it's the only way to participate is to be a data point. And then she said, "What's our agency?" And I was very shocked about this. Like we're, you know, getting spit out of this
Yes.
this machine to machine talking, and they don't need us.
Yes.
So that's what I feel is one of the interesting like challenge for a human storyteller
Yeah.
to enter ourselves in this realm.
Yeah. And I think, but I am optimistic, but we still make it happen. I mean, we're talking to each other face to face,
Yes.
like, and I think that artists have that tenacity or resiliency to like do things. And I feel like we, in this whole talk, we've done like an emotional ping pong of like feeling despair and then feeling optimistic and then feeling despair. But like, but I think that that's why I needed creativity and like an artistic community in what I do, because this is what makes me feel like, okay, I'm not alone, I'm not crazy, like these are important questions. And like, this in and of itself, like producing these kinds of like radio talks, these kinds of community engagements, it's what, we're still resisting in our own ways. We can despair, but we're obviously doing the thing.
Yes, yes.
And I think that we have to model that.
This is a good way to seg into the open up the question, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yes. And this is a great discussion. Like this is like a midnight discussion.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions,
Instead of doom scrolling for 45
No.
minutes, I think we like doom scrolled like in person doom scrolling.
which is kind of therapeutic, right?
Yes. Um, is there any question, or we could keep talking? But I think we were just saying it's about 45 minutes, and I think it's a good chance. Arai kun, なんかあります? Yes.
Can you say the second half of your question again? Sorry, there was just some background noise. Hmm. So VR specifically? Yeah.
Ah, yeah, VR. Okay.
Technologies. It's complicated. And it's and VR with ways of knowing. So this film that I produce, it's a 360 VR film. So
Mhm.
you can put on a headset, and right now we're testing a planetarium version of it, so you can watch it collectively in a dome. It's I have a soft spot for the VR version of it because it puts you in Navajo Nation, like native land. A lot of people, a lot of Americans have never been to, that Navajo land. And I think being on the headset, you really see the landscapes tower over you, and they feel like real characters. So they're not just a backdrop for a movie. So I really appreciate that. That being said, where the complication is for me is where these technologies come from. I'm very uh torn because I love the VR version, but Meta has the monopoly on the headset tech. The founder of the Oculus headset, Lucky Palmer, is now like a big defense guy.
Yeah, he's a huge.
Yeah, I think a big proponent of integrating AI in different weapon systems, right? And so it's hard. And I think as an artist or a producer, I have to be honest with that in order to use that tech. Like I will never like I'm not going to wish away or throw away the VR version because it does something like it really hits the heart in a very different way. But I think it is my responsibility in using that technology to talk openly about how I think it's incredibly problematic, and also now I'm working with uh Navajo Sunny Dooley about trying other formats. Maybe it won't have the same impact as VR, but to have like a different versions also helps us not be so dependent on this thing that I am finding very problematic. So it's hard. I don't have like a good answer to that. I think I'm just navigating it to the best of my abilities.
You said that how being in Southern California brings you back to the body, but I mean that's what I like about the VR.
Oh yeah.
It does it's physical. It's no longer this small screen, and
Mhm.
it's like just touching with a little pinky fingers. It's physical. That's what I like about it. But yes, of course, when I use the AR augmented reality markers for my project that took place in the Ground Zero Park in Nagasaki, I was struck, like the kind of terminology that's used and the technology, like tracking, visual tracking, deployment.
Mm.
These are very military terminologies, and then of course, where do they come from? I mean, a lot of these visual tracking, a lot of these technologies come from yeah, military and targeting, and so it's a strange, how do you say, it's a strange thing that we end up with. If we are not critical and careful about it, we end up becoming kind of getting sucked into this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm always trying to make sure that because it's easy to get newspaper articles to say, hey, they love this stuff, they
Mm-hmm.
love this stuff. But it's also kind of a very dangerous.
Yes.
Yes, because now the AR, for example, I did is gone because it's on the Meta platform, and I don't have access anymore. I'm
Yeah.
not paying or whatever.
Exactly. So yeah, a lot of people ask like, "Oh, can we watch Ways of Knowing on the Meta platform?"
Sure.
And I'm like, "It's not there,"
Sure.
because I feel like it's such a beautiful native story. Like I don't want it coexisting with like roller coasters or like like it has to. And I think lost out because of that because it's not as accessible, right? So it's like a trade-off and just being honest with the limitations of these technologies, even though they do bring out the best, I think, in some of our art. Cool.
She's watching this on YouTube. Okay.
Okay, so just like thinking about like the long game of disarmament. Um, you know, I think it's it's hard because we just this cultural amnesia. And I think to your point earlier, I mean, you kind of talked about it in context of the deaths in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Sometimes those numbers are so big that like you can't process them. I think it's very similar when you're like counting arsenal, you know, like 70,000 to 12,000. It's like it's still thousands, you know, at the end of the day. Um, but I think I've come to appreciate, and I guess that's what I want to do with my art, is how to in general think of this topic as the long game, right? May that be that disarmament is an achievement across generations and lifetimes, but also going back to ways of knowing, nuclear impacts is across generations and lifetimes. Contamination doesn't just exist the day that it happens, like it manifests, you know, like in such complicated, tragic ways, you know, like decades on. And
The trauma does,
yes,
just of the radiation related diseases.
yes, and I, you know, and thank you for sharing that. And I would add the shame. Like I was just talking to a good friend of mine, who does a lot of work around atomic bomb survivors, Kyoko, Professor Kyoko Matsunaga. And she talks about how, you know, survivors keep their stories and sometimes they wait like to tell their grandchildren. Like it skips a generation because of the processing of shame and trauma. And it's like really interesting how stories kind of skip around and it's and I but the problem is that it's such a harder story to tell, you know, because it's not really like promising immediate results, you know, and like as we already talked about, like the, you know, the it's and I think you need different characters, you need different like literary device, like it's just a harder story to capture visually or narratively. But I think, and I don't, if I'm being honest, I don't even know if like I'm doing it well, but I feel like my work is trying in many ways as I can, because what's wonderful about art is there's no just one way of doing it. And if it touches a person or, you know, a few people, then it's done its job. And also like art invites collaboration, you know, like I don't never feel like I'm alone. And I think it's in those collaborations that we can think together how to tell this story, this long game story. And sometimes it goes in crazy cool places. Like I'm not a VR filmmaker, but because I collaborated with people who presented it and we just went with it, like that's how Ways of Knowing came to be. And so I feel like it's challenging, but art allows me to actually, I think, take a stab at it and put like real good effort in it. But I think it's going to be a continuous experiment. But we gotta tell the story. I mean, it's the only way forward, I think.
Yes. Never
Yeah,
cease
I
to-
hope that was a calming conversation. Not like a midnight.
How does the midnight radio end, Mr. Takashi Arai? You are literally at midnight, right?
Yeah.
In Germany. What time is it?
I'm working on a short documentary that brings an American downwinder together with an atomic bomb survivor. Um, Hopefully, that project comes to fruition this year. I'm also doing a lot of writing. I guess that's the one art form that I didn't really talk about. I think writing for me is like the most concentrated because it feels personal and internal. Like, not everybody can see it. Like, you have to work on the drafts first. And in some ways, it's been very calming during the chaos of the world because I'm really just like turning into myself and just like writing it out. And so hopefully I'm able to publish those as a series of essays in the near future. So that's sort of what's coming soon. And I don't know about you and the collective, anything that you want to share?
Well, I think this is a great chance to for us. We did this big project last year. It was a kind of an anniversary year,
Mhm.
80th year, and now we are working on moving this legacy and going towards other nuclear issues in northeastern part of Tokyo, Japan. And this is kind of a first initiative picking it up the energy that we left. This kind of work is like because it's so never ending in some ways. We always, I think I personally have to be very not careful, but like I need to know how to come in and out of this dialogue because it just kind of if you keep thinking this like you go crazy,
Yeah.
so it's a part important and part I think having like collective members doing it, and I think we'd like to continue to do this radio format for a little bit and then hopefully through the dialogues merges some new directions and ideas. Speaking of, do you have any recommendation for us to speak to? It could be virtual
Oh yeah.
or anywhere in Tokyo or Germany or.
Oh, plenty.
Southern
A
Cal.
lot of different people doing amazing work. I have a good friend. Again, I kept talking about undergrads, her
Sure,
students. Her
sure.
name is Dr. Tiara Naputi. She does a lot of work around anti-militarism in Oceania.
Okay.
She's Chamorro, and she has a lot of arts connections in the Pacific and what happened there in terms of nuclear and French, U.S. and French nuclear testing. And so yeah, and there's so many
More
actually.
people, yes.
Yeah, more
And
people.
we're gonna get some context from you.
Please, I'd love to. I mean, I think that too, like LA, Southern California kind of gets written down in terms of like, oh, well, nothing's happening there in terms of work, but there's some amazing community building and stories here as well. So yeah, I'm happy to share those contacts with you all. Yeah.
Perfect.
Cool.
Well, with that, thank you so much. Now that midnight has passed in Germany.
Yes, thank you. Good night. Have a good night's sleep.
Have a good night's sleep.
Cool, thank you.
All right.
私たちは爆心を人間だけでなく全ての生命に対する懺悔行為の中心と定義する。そこには声を持たずに命を奪われた者たちが存在し、私たちの生はその周りにある。私たちは芸術、行動、研究、物語を通して爆心を語るオルタナティブな形式と方法論を探求する。全ての爆心は地続きである。爆心は誰にも所有されない。全ての爆心は等しく重みを持つ。私たちはある爆心を認めながら他の爆心を否定することで暴力を正当化したり苦しみを階層化する。あらゆる言説を拒絶する。私たちはいかなる権威や社会構造による差別や暴力にも屈しない。私たちはそれぞれ多様な個性を認めながら敬意に基づいた対等な対話とコレクティブとしての合意によって行動する。